Take a breath. Feel your feet hitting the ground. Step by step, you're moving forward. Running is more than exercise. It's proof that change happens through action. Right now, every stride is a decision. A decision to become someone stronger than you were yesterday. Your reality doesn't just change because you wish it would. Your reality changes when you change. Change the way you think. Change the way you speak to yourself. Change the habits you repeat every day. And slowly, your world starts to look different. The person who quits early lives a different life than the person who takes one more step. So who are you becoming right now? Not the old version of you who waited for motivation, but the new version who creates momentum. Feel your breathing. Feel your strength building. Every drop of sweat is a signal you're rewriting your identity. Runners don't just run. They become disciplined. They become focused. They become resistant. And when you change those things, your personal reality follows. Your opportunities change. Your confidence changes. Your future changes. Because the world responds to who you decide to be. So keep going. One more step, one more breath, one more mile closer to the person you're becoming. Today, you're not just running, you're transforming. Welcome in to Running Miles with Heart Disease. I'm your host, Josh. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about Achilles tendonitis. I've had the injury here since September, the end of September, or maybe the beginning of September. And I got it. The best thinking I could do on it is why I got it is I think I ran 15 miles on a trail road, or just a trail, and then I only slept an hour or two, and then I ran 30 miles on a road. So I think because of the trail and the road, also mainly because of the sleep issue, I only got 1 to 2 hours of sleep. And with that kind of thing, I ended up hurting my Achilles. And I think it was at mile 15, I really started to feel some pain into the second run of the 30 miles that I ran. And I kind of just fought through it. Tried to stretch it, and that pain didn't seem to go away when I was stretching it. I kind of had to limp for the next 15 miles. And then the next day it got really bad, and I could barely walk, and started to learn about the injury at that point. And anyways, it's definitely some bad news, because those injuries looks like can last quite a bit, up to 9 months, and then some people can get Achilles tendonitis for like 2 years, 3 years, and that's really devastating. And there's all kind of approaches to it, which I've learned. It's just some kind of irritating thing on the back of your foot, and psychologically, you're thinking, well, should I run? Because it kind of hurts. But then it's just the same amount of pain no matter how much you run sometimes. So it's definitely some kind of strange injury for sure, for runners at least. I don't know about football players or baseball players. All I can speak about is running in a sense. So try to focus on that. Anyways, this episode, I kind of still have the injury. And I just kind of want to talk about it a little bit to maybe help somebody. Just want to first recognize that I am not a physician, and I am not a PT person. I'm just, a regular runner that's have the injury and is trying to push through. So any advice I give you, please don't take it to heart, and always seek medical advice, by a ankle and foot doctor, or you can go see a podiatrist, or you can see a PT professional, and they can give you some correct exercises to do. The advice I was given to do were these exercises, and then to run less. But one of those advices I never followed. I never decided to run less. So that's my mistake. You should probably listen to them, and maybe you'd have better healing sooner. Yeah, that's what I could say about that. Anyways, they say to go to 10 millimeter drop shoe to like a 12 millimeter drop shoe. The shoe brands change all the time, and with their drops and the shoes that do the drops and all that stuff, like, you just have to research it for whichever model that you're going for. But I had the Brooks. They were 10 millimeter drops or 12 millimeter drops. And then I still have the 1080s, which is an 8 millimeter drop of the brand that I had, or the model that I had, or that I have. And then, so I've tried all that stuff. Let's see. I got one of those things to raise the heel that you can put in your foot, your shoe. And I tried that, and that did not help because, I guess it could have helped, but it was a trade-off because I started getting really bad knee pain. So I couldn't, I'd rather have Achilles pain than knee pain. I'd hate for something to happen to my knee, because I've never had to have knee pain, which I've been fortunate to be a long-distance runner with no knee pain, which has been great, knock on wood. So, I didn't want to get the pain in my knee, so I quickly had to not do that. Another thing I've tried, there's these things you could buy for your ankle to support the Achilles. Anyways, they're like tight. They're like really compressioned, almost like a compression sock, but they go over your heel and over your Achilles. I tried that, and that actually, it seemed to make it worse. Although it did relieve the pain, um, but if you leave it on there for a long time, then it makes it worse. Would I say a long time? I'd say it like, I don't know, 2 hours, 3 hours. Then it seemed to make it worse. So I couldn't do that either. But what gives it relief is getting in a 10 millimeter drop shoe or 8 millimeter drop shoe for sure. I do like grounding. If you don't know what grounding is, that's just being barefooted on the ground. And I guess just getting some of the electricity from the ground or something, if that makes sense. But, I can't really do that until the summertime, or late spring, early fall. So I haven't been doing that. So it hasn't been an issue. But anyways, I read some articles about zero drop shoes, and I still have the injury and I wasn't getting any better. So I guess wanted to try a zero drop, see if it could maybe help the Achilles and just test the theory. And so far, it hasn't made the injury worse, if that makes sense. And I did 26 miles yesterday, and with the zero drop shoes, and on a trail, on a road. I switched it a little bit, and the Achilles was a 1, or it was a 0 most of the time. And during the week, this week, I've been doing on Mondays, when I go on just a 5-mile run, I use my 8 millimeter drops, and then I use 0 drop shoes on my second run on Wednesday, and then on Thursday I'm doing the stairs for my VO2 workout, and I use the 8 millimeter drops for that. And I mean, it seems to be doing good. I'm always curious, and don't mind trying new things to try to help it out. But I guess this morning, just walking around, and sometimes it feels like a 0, or sometimes it feels like a 1. So that's always a really good sign, especially after such a long run. So that's great. Just trying to be honest, and just want to let you know what's working. Anyways, yeah, I mean, it hasn't been 9 months yet since I've had the injury, although getting up there. Hopefully one day, hopefully it'll go away. I'm hoping. And maybe next time, after this race, when I don't run as much, maybe that's when the good healing happens. But I think for now, switching it up and giving the Achilles some rest with the 8 millimeter drops in some of my workouts, I think has helped it a little bit, versus some of the other weeks that I just did 0 drop shoes the whole week. I can definitely feel a difference. So hopefully that's some good advice that I could give you. I guess just balance out the workouts with the shoes, and hopefully it helps the Achilles. But some medical advice I got was definitely don't run as long. So, and that can heal it too. I never listened to that advice, but maybe if you're a little smarter than me, maybe you'll listen to the advice, and hopefully your Achilles can heal quicker than mine did. Anyways, it's such a frustrating injury because, I mean, you can be scared, like, to go running, especially if you're starting out at a 2, or you're starting, I'm talking about this pain level from 1 to 10 on a scale. When I say this 1 or I say this 2, it's like a pain scale. Anyways, yeah, I mean, if you're starting out your run and you're at a 2, you might be scared to go on like a 16-mile run, because you don't know if that pain's going to get worse or if it's going to stay the same. So it's definitely such a frustrating injury. But in my experience, it seems like, for me, it just seems to stay the same. Although it has gotten worse sometimes. But not that bad usually. It just, if I'm starting out the run and it's a 1, then maybe it'll go to a 2 or a 3. But usually it stays at a 1 for the whole run. But lately it's been going to 0 and staying 1. And that recently has happened when I changed to 8mm drop shoes with my workouts during the week. But I did want to make the commitment to at least do the long runs in the 0 drop shoe, even since the title, is 0 drop. So definitely want to stick to that. Also, I don't know. It's definitely easier to run in a 10mm drop shoe because, I don't know, if it just feels better sometimes, versus filling the ground. And especially when I wear the minimal 0 drop shoes, you can feel everything, and sometimes it hurts. Not the feet, but it hurts to run, I guess. But anyways, yeah, I'm trying to think of all the information I could give you about this injury, and maybe something you could do to help it out. But definitely doing the workouts that you're supposed to be doing for the Achilles injury has helped. And I remember when I stopped it and tried not to do the Achilles workouts, my Achilles got worse. So definitely got to integrate those Achilles workouts into the training that you're doing, on top of the training that you're doing. So yeah, I wouldn't skip out on the Achilles workouts, and make sure you do that. Isolated heel or calf raises, and then jumps. I'm not sure on the technical name of these things, so that's why I'm kind of like, maybe I shouldn't talk about what I do for the workouts. But I sit down on a bench, and I put the weights on my knees, and then I lift my heels into the air, and do that really slowly, about 30 times with heavy weight. If you have a bar with weights on it, you could use that. But I only have dumbbells, so I use dumbbells and put them on my knees. And then one-legged calf raises, really slow, is what you need to do for the Achilles. Isolated heel raises. And then I do some jumps with weights, which has helped. And then you can sit down and do where you get the band around your foot and go really slow. I've been doing that, and those are kind of 4 Achilles workouts that I do. Usually it takes about 30 minutes to do a Achilles workout. Just because it's so slow, it's very time consuming because each rep is so slow. It's isolated. So it's not like bam, 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 bam. It's like hold 5 seconds. Hold 5 seconds. So the Achilles workouts do take a long time because they're isolated. And so, yeah, so that's just some stuff. Hopefully it can help you out. Hopefully, this podcast can encourage you a little bit if you're worried about this injury. But once again, everybody's different. Everybody has their own injuries, and you could be really close to tearing your Achilles or something like that. So you definitely want to get some medical advice, maybe some X-rays, MRI to see how the Achilles is. But I never ripped mine, or maybe I ripped it, but I never broke it, or I don't know what the correct term is on that. But I was fortunate not to have that problem. I think you could be out even longer with a problem like that. So, yeah. But I remember, man, those Achilles workouts at the very beginning, they helped a lot. And I couldn't even do a one-legged calf raise, let alone, when I do these, usually I use a 60-pound weight. But I'm talking about calf raises, like, I couldn't even do. I'd have to do it with like two feet on the ground, with no weights. That's how bad it was, and I could feel everything when I lifted up and lifted down. So it's come a long ways, but yeah, those workouts do really help, and it is definitely a tough injury because it's like almost psychological, because you're like, well, I don't want to run because I got a little bit of pain. But if you don't work out the Achilles, I guess what I'm saying is it could make it worse, is what the research that I've read about. So, you just got to psychologically get over that thought of it's painful, I guess, and still work it out. But maybe just little runs, maybe 30-minute runs or something instead of 2-hour runs, is what's recommended. Anyways, we're going to get AI's opinion on all of this, and that's why that's always great. We'll see, and maybe I'll learn something too. Also, I've been doing the protein shakes with the long runs. Wanted to update you on that. Hulu Black Edition is really bad at mixing. So I think I'm going to stick to the Shakeology because it's easier to mix, or the Vigo, easier to mix. Definitely don't want to take that stuff anymore. I took it this last run and just had a bad experience with it mixing and got it spilt everywhere. And I did the salt pills this last run, and really bad. I was really dehydrated because my pee was really yellow. So that's how I know. So I definitely gotta definitely take some extra electrolytes. This last long run, I just took the pills, like I said I would, but I don't think that was a good option. just because I was dehydrated. I think I drank plenty of water. Or I thought I did, but obviously I didn't because I was dehydrated. So, and then I had gut issues, and I could not eat any more of dried pineapple and figs. It was so gross. I think if I ate one more, I would have thrown up. So, it was. I was at the end. If that was the race, I mean, I could have been done for sure. So I think I'm gonna have to work out. So I've got a different strategy for the long run coming up here soon. Maybe just more variety for sure. And then I'm going to have to take some ginger pills, I think, to help the gut, which has been really beneficial with my last ultras that I've ran. That ginger does help. You can get ginger in some packets with sugar. They sell it at Costco. I tried that. I can't stomach that ginger stuff. So I do benefit from taking the pill. Then you don't taste it, which is great. And I think this next run, maybe I'll just take a ginger pill every 2 hours or something while I'm running and see if that helps the gut. Then I'm also going to do a variety of food, which can help the gut as well. And then I'll still take the protein shake with the pure cane sugar. And then I think I'm going to add 50 milligrams of sodium to the mix. Just, I guess, table salt, right? To my bag of protein shake and sugar. And hopefully that can keep me hydrated for the next long run. I'm not sure what food I'll take right now on the top of my head, but it's gonna have to be something, a different variety for sure. Maybe I'll take some kind of candy or something, because just thinking back on hour 5, I mean, I was done. I would throw up that pineapple, man. That was so gross. And now I don't even want to look at that stuff. Like, I can't. I'll never take dried pineapple again. I don't know. Something's happened. Every time I look at it now, I just want to throw up. So I'm done with it. I'm done with dried pineapple. Gross. Anyways, let's listen to AI, and we'll see if we can get some more knowledge on the Achilles tendonitis.
If you have ever laced up a pair of running shoes, stepped out the front door, and immediately felt that dreaded tight pinch in the back of your heel.
Oh, yeah, we've all been there.
Right, then you know exactly what we are talking about today. Or maybe you're just insanely curious about human biomechanics. Maybe you've wondered how the body manages to absorb and release thousands of pounds of force mile after mile without just shattering.
It is pretty miraculous when you think about it.
It really is. So either way, you are in exactly the right place. Today, our mission is to completely decode the mysteries of the Achilles tendon.
The big one.
The primary energy storing structure of the lower extremity. It is the thickest, the strongest, and frankly, the most fascinating tendon in the human body.
And yet, it's also, it is notoriously one of the most stubborn, frustrating tissues to heal once it gets angry.
Oh, without a doubt. So our goal today is to give you a shortcut to becoming exceptionally well-informed. We want to provide you with the ultimate blueprint for protecting, training, and rehabilitating this vital tendon. We want to help you bulletproof your lower legs.
And we are not just throwing out general, internet forum advice today.
Definitely not.
We are working from an incredibly robust stack of sources to build this blueprint. We're synthesizing a truly diverse range of clinical, and biomechanical data to give you the clearest picture possible.
We really have a massive stack to go through. We're looking at cutting-edge biomechanical studies, including this brand new cross-sectional study from December 2024.
That's the one comparing the trail runners and road runners, right?
Exactly. It looks at the actual tendon morphology of mountain trail runners versus flat road runners. We also have a really wild, double-blind, randomized controlled trial from December 2025.
Looking at collagen peptide supplementation.
Yes, and how it directly alters tendon stiffness. And then on the clinical side, we are pulling from modern rehabilitation consensus guidelines from Chirope.
Plus, the strict return to running protocols from physical therapist Nathan Carlson.
Right, and incredibly specific phased recovery regimens from the University of Colorado Sports Medicine. Oh, and we're even bringing in load management strategies from Sunrise Running Company.
The ultramarathon coaches.
Exactly. So we are covering everything from the microscopic cellular level all the way up to running 100 miles through the woods.
It is a phenomenal collection of data. But before we get into the weeds of the mountain running adaptations or the specific physical therapy exercises.
Don't need to set the foundation.
Right. We have to fundamentally shift how we think about tendon health. Because for decades, the prevailing mindset, both in doctors' offices and among athletes, has been highly binary.
Like an on-off switch.
Precisely. You are either perfectly healthy or you are injured. You are either running or you are in a walking boot.
Yeah, that's definitely how I used to think about it.
Most people do. But modern sports medicine requires us to completely break that outdated binary view. We have to move toward a continuum model of tendon health.
A continuum model?
Yes. Your Achilles is not an on-off switch. It's a highly dynamic, living tissue that exists on a continuous sliding scale of adaptation and, occasionally maladaptation.
Right.
Understanding exactly where you sit on that continuum at any given moment is the absolute foundation of everything we are going to explore today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the language we use to describe our pain really matters.
It dictates the treatment.
Right. I hear people at the local track or hanging out at the trailhead constantly talking about their quote-unquote Achilles tendonitis.
Oh, constantly.
It's almost a badge of honor. They say, I have to cut my run short. My tendonitis is flaring up again. But looking at the clinical sources in our stack, that term tendonitis is actually considered a total myth now, right?
A complete myth.
The sports medicine world has shifted to using the term tendinopathy. And I'll be honest, I always assumed that was just doctors using a fancier word for the same swollen ankle. Does the terminology actually change how we approach the injury?
It absolutely changes the entire paradigm of treatment. It's the exact opposite of just semantics.
Really?
Yeah. Think about the suffix itis. In medicine, itisus implies active acute inflammation.
Like appendicitis.
Or tonsillitis, arthritis.
Yeah.
Right. So for a very long time, the medical community genuinely believed that when your Achilles tendon hurt, it was because it was actively inflamed.
They pictured it swollen and angry.
Exactly. Swollen with white blood cells and inflammatory markers rushing to a site of acute microscopic tearing. And because of that belief, the standard medical advice was entirely focused on stopping inflammation.
Rest, ice, ibuprofen.
Right. Doctors told you to rest completely, ice the tendon to freeze the swelling, and take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs around the clock.
But that's not what's actually happening.
No. As imaging technology advanced, and as researchers started taking actual tissue biopsies of these chronically painful Achilles tendons,
They actually cut into them.
yeah, they took samples. And they made a massive paradigm-shifting discovery. When they looked at the painful tissue under a high-powered microscope, they did not find a sea of inflammatory cells.
Wow.
The inflammation just wasn't there.
Wait, really? So if it wasn't inflamed, why was it swollen and why did it hurt so much?
Because they were looking at a degenerative continuum, not an inflammatory event. The term tendinopathy is an umbrella term that accurately reflects the reality.
Which is what, exactly?
It's a degenerative process involving massive collagen disorganization, extracellular matrix breakdown, and essentially a failed healing response by the body. The structural integrity of the tissue itself is compromised.
That sounds much worse than just a little swelling.
It is. To truly visualize this, we look to the continuum model of tendon pathology. This was famously proposed by researchers Jill Cook and Craig Purdom.
Right, the Cook and Purdom model from the notes.
Yeah, they revolutionized physical therapy by mapping out this pathology into 3 very distinct progressive stages.
I want to walk through those 3 stages, and I want to ground this in what you, the listener, actually feel. Let's say you usually run 20 miles a week.
Okay.
The weather is perfect, you are feeling ambitious, and you decide to jump into a brutal, hilly group run. You push your mileage to 40 miles for the week. You wake up the next morning and step out of bed. What is the very first thing happening biologically in that first stage?
That first stage is what Cook and Purdom call reactive tendinopathy.
Reactive.
Yes. This is the tendon's acute, immediate response to a sudden, massive spike in mechanical load.
Like doubling your mileage overnight.
Exactly. Your body is smart. It senses that the 20 miles of stress it was used to just doubled to 40 miles. In response, the tendon physically thickens.
But you said earlier it isn't traditional inflammation.
Right, and this is the critical part. Inside the tendon, you have these specialized cells called tenocytes. When exposed to that sudden overload, these tenocytes basically panic, but in a productive way. They start rapidly manufacturing proteins called proteoglycans.
Proteoglycans. I'm guessing those aren't the kind of proteins you get from eating a chicken breast.
No, definitely not dietary protein.
What do they actually do inside the Achilles?
You can think of proteoglycans like millions of microscopic, highly absorbent sponges embedded right into the tendon matrix.
Sponges.
Yeah, they are extremely hydrophilic, meaning they love water. They aggressively draw a massive amount of fluid from the surrounding tissue straight into the extracellular matrix of the tendon.
Just sucking up all the local water.
Right, and the sudden influx of water causes the entire tendon to swell and expand.
So if you wake up the morning after a massive run and your Achilles feels like a stiff, swollen sausage for those first 10 steps out of bed.
Which is a classic symptom.
Yeah, that stiffness isn't a tight muscle. It's literally the proteoglycans holding a bunch of water.
That is exactly what you're feeling. The stiffness is fluid pressure, and it's actually a brilliant short-term evolutionary adaptation.
Brilliant how? It feels awful.
I know, but by drawing in water and thickening the overall diameter of the tendon, the body is attempting to increase the tendon's cross-sectional area.
Oh, I see. A thicker cable can handle more stress.
Precisely. It is creating a hydrostatic shock absorber to protect the individual collagen fibers from snapping under the new, heavier workload.
That is wild. The body just pumps up its own shock absorbers. And the notes say that if you catch it in this phase, it's reversible.
Completely reversible. That is the beauty of the reactive phase.
So what do you do?
If you recognize that stiff, swollen feeling as a warning sign, if you modify your training load, take a rest day, or drop your mileage back down to a manageable level, the tenocytes calm down.
The panic stops.
Right. The proteoglycans stop pulling in fluid, the water is flushed out of the system, and the tendon returns to its normal, highly organized, thin structural state. No permanent damage is done.
But let's be honest about runner psychology. A lot of runners hate resting.
Oh, they despise it.
So what happens if you ignore that stiff, sausage-like feeling? What if you pop 3 ibuprofen, mask the discomfort, and go out and hammer another 40-mile week right on top of that swollen tendon?
That decision pushes you directly into the second stage, which Cook and Purdom call tendon disrepair.
Disrepair.
Yes. Because the tendon is being relentlessly overloaded without a chance to recover, that short-term water swelling mechanism completely fails to protect the underlying tissue.
The shock absorbers bottom out.
Exactly. To understand disrepair, you have to picture healthy collagen. In a healthy Achilles, the type R collagen fibers look like a brand new box of uncooked spaghetti.
Perfectly straight.
Perfectly straight, tightly bundled, and running exactly parallel to each other to handle the vertical pulling force. In the disrepair stage, those parallel strands begin to separate.
They separate.
They kink, and they become highly disorganized. The matrix holding them together starts to actively break down.
It sounds like a thick, braided rope that is starting to aggressively fray right in the middle.
That's the perfect visualization. The structural integrity is failing. And, as the rope frays, a very insidious biological process occurs called neovascularization.
Neovascularization.
Yeah.
Break that word down for me.
Sure. Neo means new. Vascular refers to blood vessels. The body senses that the tissue is severely damaged and trapped in a state of failed healing. Now, tendons are naturally avascular.
Meaning they don't have much blood flow.
Right, they do not have a rich blood supply, which is why they look bright white in anatomy textbooks, unlike red muscle. Because the tendon is failing, the body panics and attempts to force a healing response by growing tiny, brand new blood vessels, that's the neovascularization, directly into the disorganized, frayed collagen to deliver nutrients.
That sounds like a good thing, though. Trying to heal it.
You would think so, but there is a massive catch. When these new chaotic blood vessels grow into the tendon, they drag tiny new nerve endings right along with them.
Oh,
Yeah.
so your body is literally growing brand new pain receptors directly into the exact spot where the tissue is tearing.
Exactly.
That seems like a design flaw.
Well, it's the body's desperate attempt to force you to stop moving. However, and this is perhaps the most terrifying part of the continuum for endurance athletes, the disrepair phase is notoriously deceptive.
Deceptive how?
It is often completely asymptomatic, or it only presents with very mild intermittent symptoms.
Wait, how is that possible with new nerves growing?
Because you've been running through it and likely managing it with painkillers, you could have a heavily disorganized collagen matrix with new blood vessels and nerves growing into it, but you don't feel a crippling, stop you in your tracks pain.
That is incredibly unsettling. That makes me wonder how many listeners right now are unknowingly walking around in the disrepair phase.
More than you'd think.
They think they are perfectly healthy because they don't have severe pain, but structurally, their Achilles is a frayed rope just waiting for the wrong step.
Epidemiologically speaking, a very high percentage of consistent runners are hovering in this phase, which is what leads to the third and final stage of the continuum,
Which is?
degenerative tendinopathy. This is the chronic end-stage state. If the overloading continues relentlessly past disrepair, the tendon enters a phase characterized by extensive, irreversible cell death.
Irreversible cell death.
The technical term is apoptosis. The tenocytes, the very cells responsible for maintaining the tendon, literally give up and die off.
They just quit.
They do. The extracellular matrix becomes severely degraded. You develop actual structural voids or empty pockets inside the tendon tissue.
Pockets of nothing inside the tendon.
Yes. The tendon loses a massive percentage of its load-bearing capacity. And if you reach this degenerative stage, you are at a significantly heightened risk of a catastrophic spontaneous tendon rupture.
A rupture. That is the classic nightmare scenario.
It is.
Where someone is just pushing off to sprint and they hear a loud pop that sounds like a gunshot and the tendon just completely gives way.
Yes. And the tragedy of the degenerative stage is that, unlike the reactive phase, it is incredibly difficult to reverse.
Because the cells are dead.
Exactly. You cannot simply rest and wait for dead cells to come back to life. You are managing a permanently altered tissue. So the entire goal of understanding this biological continuum is not to scare you into sitting on the couch for the rest of your life.
Right, because doing nothing is also bad.
In fact, our clinical sources are adamant that removing load entirely is a terrible idea. Complete rest causes a phenomenon known as stress shielding.
Stress shielding.
If you put an achy tendon in a walking boot for a month, the tissue is shielded from all mechanical stress. Without that stress signaling the cells to stay strong, the tendon actually atrophies and weakens even further.
It just melts away.
Basically, when you finally take the boot off, it is more vulnerable than before. The ultimate goal is to optimize the mechanical stimulus.
Optimize it.
You want to apply enough load to signal the cells to lay down new, healthy, parallel collagen, but not so much load that you push yourself from a reactive state into structural disrepair.
So knowing that this entire biological cascade is driven by mechanical load, it begs the question, who is actually most at risk of triggering this?
The epidemiology is really revealing.
Yeah, our sources dive deep into the epidemiological risk profiling, and some of the data points completely blew my mind. When we look at the pure demographics of who ends up in a physical therapy clinic with Achilles tendinopathy, the numbers are not evenly split.
Not at all.
A staggering 84% of Achilles tendinopathy cases occur in male runners. 84%.
Yeah.
Why is there such a massive, disproportionate gender disparity? Is it just that men run more?
What's fascinating here is how basic anatomical differences intersect with complex hormonal profiles. It isn't just about participation rates.
Okay, so what is it?
The research indicates that the massive disparity comes down to the physical engine driving the tendon. On average, men possess a significantly larger gastrocnemius and soleus muscle mass.
Those are the two primary calf muscles, right?
Yes, those are the two primary calf muscles that merge at the bottom of the leg to form the Achilles tendon. Because men generally have much larger, more powerful calf muscles, those muscles generate incredibly high tensile strain.
Like sheer pulling force.
Exactly, sheer pulling force on the Achilles tendon during the toe-off phase of the running gait. Every single step a male runner takes is potentially applying a much greater magnitude of raw physical force through that tendon purely due to the size of the muscle pulling it.
That makes perfect sense from a physics standpoint. If you have a massive V8 engine pulling on a tow cable, it's going to put more stress on the cable than a four-cylinder engine would.
A great analogy.
But the notes also mention a hormonal aspect to this disparity. What does estrogen have to do with tendon health?
The endocrinology of tendons is a rapidly expanding field of study. The sources highlight that estrogen, which is found in much higher concentrations in female athletes, appears to play a highly protective role in tendon collagen metabolism.
Protective how?
Estrogen actively influences how the tendon repairs and remodels itself following strenuous, eccentric exercise. It essentially makes the cellular signaling more efficient.
So women recover faster at a cellular level?
Potentially, yes. It makes the female Achilles slightly more resilient to the repetitive microtrauma of distance running. It helps the tissue recover from the reactive phase before it can slip into disrepair.
That is incredible. So men are physically pulling harder on the tendon with every step, and women might have a built-in biochemical advantage in repairing the microdamage.
That's what the current data suggests.
But beyond gender, we have to talk about age. We all know that things get a bit creakier as we get older, but what is literally happening to the Achilles tendon when you turn 40 or 50?
Age is a major unavoidable risk factor. As we age, the Achilles tendon naturally undergoes intrinsic structural modifications.
Modifications like what?
Well, earlier we talked about how a healthy reactive tendon draws in water using proteoglycans.
The sponges.
Right. As you age, the baseline water content of your entire tendon matrix naturally progressively decreases. The tissue literally dries out.
It just becomes less hydrated naturally.
Furthermore, the actual ratio of the types of collagen in the tendon shifts. A healthy young tendon is primarily constructed of type I collagen.
The good stuff.
The really good stuff, it is incredibly strong, tightly bundled, and stiff. As the decades pass, the body becomes less efficient at producing type 1 and starts substituting it with more type 3 collagen.
And type 3 is not as good.
Type 3 is functionally inferior. It is less organized, more haphazard, and significantly weaker. The end result is a tendon that is less elastic, less capable of absorbing shock, and much more brittle.
So an older runner isn't just dealing with general fatigue. They literally have a fundamentally different, more fragile material making up their Achilles than a 20-year-old does.
Precisely. But our clinical sources are very careful to point out that this decrease in structural integrity does not mean you are doomed to stop running as you age.
Thank goodness.
It simply means the margin for error shrinks drastically. A 20-year-old might be able to double their mileage overnight, suffer a reactive tendon, and bounce back in 3 days.
Because they have all that type I collagen and water.
Right. An older athlete does not have that luxury. They must utilize a much more nuanced, patient approach to training volume. They have to prioritize dedicated strength training and mobility work to artificially maintain the load capacity that youth use to provide for free.
Makes total sense. And the risk profile extends beyond just age and gender. It ties into your overall systemic health.
It absolutely does.
The sources strongly link various metabolic disorders to a higher risk of tendinopathy. Conditions like high blood pressure and, surprisingly, autoimmune conditions like psoriasis are positively associated with developing persistent Achilles symptoms.
Yeah, systemic inflammation plays a role.
Plus, individuals with a higher body mass index, or BMI, naturally experience increased ground reaction forces. If you're carrying extra weight, every single step places an exponentially greater repetitive strain on the posterior chain.
Basic physics again.
But out of all the systemic factors listed in the research, there was one that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. Antibiotics.
Yes, specifically a very potent class of antibiotics known as fluoroquinolones.
Fluoroquinolones.
Common brand names you might recognize are Cipro or Levaquin.
Why in the world would taking an antibiotic for a sinus infection or bronchitis increase your risk of tearing your Achilles tendon? How do those two systems even interact?
It is a profound chemical interaction. Fluoroquinolones have a well-documented adverse biochemical effect on collagen synthesis and degradation.
Meaning they stop it from building?
Worse, they essentially poison the cellular machinery inside the tenocytes that maintains the extracellular matrix. They upregulate enzymes that actively break down collagen while simultaneously halting the production of new collagen.
So they break down the old and stop the new.
Exactly. Clinical research has shown that these specific antibiotics can rapidly and dramatically increase the risk of both severe sudden onset tendinopathy and catastrophic spontaneous tendon rupture.
And is this just if you take them for months at a time?
No, and that's the scary part. Ruptures have been documented after just a few doses. and the risk can remain elevated for months after you stop taking the medication.
That is a massive public service announcement. If you are a runner, a tennis player, or anyone who heavily loads their Achilles and a doctor hands you a prescription for a fluoroquinolone, you absolutely need to pause.
You have to advocate for yourself.
You need to discuss your athletic lifestyle with them and ask if there is an alternative class of antibiotics available, because you are temporarily altering the structural integrity of your connective tissue.
It is a critical conversation to have with a physician.
Okay, so we've established the biological and systemic risks, but we also have to look at the biomechanical risks, how your foot actually interacts with the ground.
This is where things get really counterintuitive.
Seriously. The sources highlight a prospective 12-month study that tracked runners to see if their baseline ankle movement patterns could predict who would eventually develop Achilles pain.
And the findings of that study completely contradict what you hear at the running shoe store.
Right. Everyone talks about overpronation like it's the ultimate evil. You go to buy shoes and they immediately try to correct your pronation.
Yeah.
But this study found something entirely different.
Entirely different. The researchers found that a lower peak ankle inversion moment during the stance phase actually strongly predicts the onset of tendinopathy.
Wait, let me visualize this. Ankle inversion is when the sole of the foot rolls inward toward the midline of your body.
Yes.
So a lower inversion moment means the ankle is rolling inward less.
Correct. Runners who naturally exhibit a stronger inward rolling force, a movement that many people broadly and often incorrectly demonize as overpronation, actually appear to have a built-in protective mechanism against tendon overload.
The inward roll is protective.
The inward roll acts as a natural dissipation of force. If you have a lower peak ankle inversion moment, meaning your ankle stays rigid and doesn't roll inward to absorb the shock, your risk of injury skyrockets.
The force has to go somewhere.
Exactly. Furthermore, the study found that a lower peak ankle external rotation angle during the stance phase also significantly increased the odds of an Achilles injury.
So having a highly rigid, stiff, non-rotating ankle during your foot strike is a terrible thing.
It is. The ankle is a complex joint and needs to move through these specific rotational and inversion planes to properly distribute the immense ground reaction forces away from the Achilles.
If the ankle joint itself lacks that specific mobility or fluid force absorption capability,
the mechanical stress doesn't just disappear. Energy has to go somewhere. The stress travels straight up the kinetic chain, and the Achilles tendon, acting as the primary bottleneck of force, is forced to absorb the absolute brunt of that impact.
Wow. So if we look at the complete pathophysiological continuum, we can see the perfect storm forming.
A very dangerous storm.
Imagine you have a male runner in his late 40s, maybe carrying 10 extra pounds. He gets a sinus infection and takes a fluoroquinolone antibiotic. He has naturally rigid, stiff ankle biomechanics.
Check, check, check.
Right. And he feels better on a Saturday, so he goes out and decides to double his normal weekend mileage to make up for lost time. He's practically begging his cellular matrix to bypass the reactive phase and violently enter the disrepair phase.
That hypothetical runner is the textbook embodiment of every risk factor converging at once.
This sets us up perfectly to shift our focus. We've talked extensively about the risks of running on hard, flat roads. But what happens to this biology when you completely change the environment?
The terrain matters immensely.
What happens when you take this complex, vulnerable spring and subject it to the chaotic terrain of the mountains? We have a fascinating cross-sectional study here from December 2024, published in the Journal of Functional Morphology and Kinesiology.
This is a great study.
The researchers set out to answer a simple but profound question. Does running up mountains physically change the shape and size of your tendons compared to running on flat pavement?
To truly appreciate the findings of this study, we have to look closely at the distinct training differences between the two groups of athletes they analyzed.
Okay, break it down.
They recruited 66 highly experienced runners in total. 33 of them were dedicated road runners, and 33 were dedicated mountain trail runners. Both groups were highly active, taking their training seriously.
So they were all fit?
Very fit. The 33 road runners were averaging about 30 kilometers a week. Crucially, their accumulated positive elevation gain was only about 50 meters a week.
So they were putting in consistent miles, but almost entirely on flat, predictable, hard surfaces. 30 kilometers and basically no hills.
Right.
What are the 33 trail runners? What were their weeks looking like?
The trail runners were in a completely different stratosphere of mechanical loading. They were averaging a massive 80 kilometers a week.
Wow.
But the standout metric was their elevation. They were accumulating an average of 2,500 meters of positive elevation gain every single week.
2,500 meters. For the listeners using imperial measurements, that is over 8,200 feet of vertical climbing, week in and week out. The road runners were doing 160 feet.
It is a staggeringly different mechanical stimulus being applied to the human body.
It's an entirely different sport from a biomechanical perspective.
It really is. Trail running is not just road running on dirt. The incredibly uneven terrain, the roots, the rocks, the punishingly steep ascents, and the quad-destroying descents impose unique physiological demands that flat ground simply cannot replicate.
So the researchers bring these 66 highly trained athletes into a clinical laboratory setting. They have them lie down, and they use high-definition ultrasound imaging to look deep inside their legs.
Looking specifically at the connective tissue.
Right. They specifically chose to look at two different tendons. The patellar tendon, which sits just below your kneecap and connects the quad to the shin, and the Achilles tendon. I assumed that running up mountains would just build massive, thick tendons everywhere in the leg. But what did the ultrasound actually show?
The core finding was incredibly specific and quite stark. When the researchers analyzed the ultrasound images of the patellar tendon at the knee, they found absolutely no significant differences between the two groups.
Wait, really?
None. The thickness, the density, and the cross-sectional area of the knee tendons were virtually identical, regardless of whether the athlete ran exclusively on flat pavement or spent 10 hours a week climbing steep mountainsides.
The knee tendon didn't care about the mountains at all. But I'm guessing the Achilles was a different story.
An entirely different story. The ultrasound revealed that the trail runners possessed significantly thicker Achilles tendons with a substantially larger cross-sectional area, or CSA.
So they were just bigger.
Yes. The absolute physical volume, the overall girth of their Achilles tendons was fundamentally measurably larger than the road runners.
I want to pause here because this is fascinating. Why would the mountain terrain selectively beef up the Achilles tendon, but completely ignore the patellar tendon at the knee? Is it just that trails are softer?
To answer that, we have to strip away the terrain and look purely at the biomechanics of running uphill against gravity.
Uphill running specifically.
Yes. When you run on a flat road, you have a choice. You might naturally be a heel striker rolling onto your midfoot, or you might be a forefoot striker.
Sure.
But when you face a steep 15% trail incline, your biomechanics are overridden by physics. Uphill running virtually forces every single runner into a midfoot or pure forefoot strike pattern.
Right, if you try to heel strike on a steep hill, you'll just fall backward. You are perpetually on your toes, leaning into the grate.
Exactly. And shifting to a continuous forefoot strike places massively increased, isolated demands on the ankle joint and the Achilles tendon.
Ah, I see.
The biomechanical research shows that during uphill running, the ankle's range of motion is about 15% greater than during level road running.
Because you're reaching further down the hill.
Because the ground is sloping up to meet you, your heel drops lower relative to your toes with every single step. This places the Achilles tendon in a severe pre-stretch condition during every run cycle. It is being stretched significantly further under the full load of your body weight before the calf muscle violently contracts to propel you upward and forward.
It's like taking a thick rubber band, pulling it back an extra 2 inches beyond its normal stretch, and then snapping it thousands and thousands of times an hour.
That is a highly accurate visualization of the tissue strain. Furthermore, the kinetic data reveals that the demands for energy absorption and generation during an uphill climb are 2 to 4 times greater in the ankle than they are in the knee.
2 to 4 times?
Yes. The knee joint, and therefore the patellar tendon, is simply not doing the lion's share of the work on a steep climb. The ankle and the Achilles are the primary engines of vertical ascent.
So the Achilles gets all the work.
Right. Because the Achilles is forced to adapt to this extreme, highly concentrated workload, the tissue undergoes hypertrophy. It actively builds new matrix, resulting in the thickening and the increased cross-sectional area that the ultrasound detected.
It literally constructs a thicker, heavier-duty cable to handle the specific demands of the elevation. But I want to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
We noted that the trail runners were doing 80 kilometers a week, and the road runners were only doing 30. How do the researchers know that the thicker tendons were caused by the mountains, and not just by the fact that the trail runners were running more than double the total distance? Maybe more miles just equals thicker tendons.
That is a crucial scientific distinction, and the researchers accounted for it. They ran a complex statistical analysis to separate those two variables, volume and elevation.
And what do they find?
They found moderate, positive correlations between the Achilles cross-sectional area and both weekly volume and elevation gain.
Both of them.
Yes. As mileage increased, the tendon grew. And independently, as vertical climbing increased, the tendon grew. This dual adaptation highlights one of the most incredible concepts in sports physiology, known as the repeated bout effect.
The repeated bout effect. I've heard strength coaches use that term. What does it actually mean at a cellular level for a runner?
It is the profound ability of the human musculotendinous system to trigger an inherent cellular memory and deploy protective mechanisms in response to controlled damage.
Control damage.
When these ultra trail runners subject their tendons to the extreme eccentric loading of bombing down steep descents and grinding up rocky climbs, it causes micro damage. But this initial damage acts as a signaling mechanism.
Signaling the tenocytes.
It signals the tissue to rebuild, but not just to baseline. It initiates an adaptive, hypertrophic process that physically enhances the tendon's structural resistance to future damage.
So it builds back stronger.
The tendon responds to the massive overload by commanding the tenocytes to produce more collagen, to weave a denser extracellular matrix, and to literally build a thicker, more resilient architectural structure.
That is awe-inspiring. The literal terrain you choose to run on physically reshapes your anatomy at a microscopic level. It is definitive proof that the human body is the ultimate adaptation machine.
It truly is.
But this brings up a massive, glaring catch-22. We just spent 20 minutes establishing that rapid spikes in mechanical load are the exact mechanism that causes reactive tendinopathy.
Which starts the degenerative continuum and frays the rope.
Exactly. Now we're saying that to build a thicker, stronger, bulletproof tendon, you have to subject it to massive loads like 80-kilometer mountain weeks.
It seems contradictory.
It totally does. How on earth does a normal runner balance this? How do you apply enough load to trigger the repeated bout effect and build a thicker tendon without pushing so hard that you trigger disrepair and end up in a physical therapist's office?
This dilemma is the holy grail of sports science, which brings us to the concept of load management and the ACWR.
You have perfectly summarized what researchers call the training injury prevention paradox.
Exactly. It is the central tension of all athletic training. Higher training loads are absolutely biologically required to improve physical performance and build resilient, injury-resistant tissues. You cannot get stronger without stress. But those exact same high training loads are, simultaneously, the primary modifiable risk factor for devastating injury. The solution to this paradox is not to stop training out of fear. The solution is to master the math of load progression.
Master the math.
And in modern sports science, the gold standard metric for quantifying and managing this progression is the acute to chronic workload ratio, or the ACWR.
The ACWR. I feel like every elite running coach and physical therapist talks about this acronym constantly, but it can sound like a math problem. Let's break this down into plain English for the listener. What exactly is the acute load and what is the chronic load?
The easiest way to conceptualize it is to think of your physical fitness like a bank account.
Okay, bank account.
Your acute load is your recent spending. It represents the total amount of training stress or physical load you have accumulated in the most recent immediate time frame, almost universally defined as the last 7 days.
The last week.
Exactly. For a strictly flat road runner, the simplest way to measure this acute load is your total weekly mileage. If you run 30 miles this week, your acute load is 30.
What if you run hills or speed work?
Then you might use a more advanced metric like exertional minutes, where you multiply the duration of the run by your perceived effort level on a scale of 1 to 10. But broadly speaking, acute load is what you did this week.
Okay, so acute load is this week's physical receipt. What is the chronic load?
Your chronic load is the baseline balance of your fitness bank account. It represents your long-term, established, deeply ingrained training capacity.
How far back does that go?
Clinically, this is calculated as your 4-week rolling average capacity. It is the average amount of stress your body has successfully adapted to handling over the last month.
So if I ran 20 miles 4 weeks ago, 20 miles 3 weeks ago, 20 miles 2 weeks ago, and 20 miles last week, my chronic load, my baseline capacity is 20 miles.
Exactly. The math is very straightforward. The acute to chronic workload ratio is simply calculated by dividing your acute load, what you did this week, by your chronic load, what your body is used to doing over the last month.
Acute divided by chronic.
When you divide those two numbers, you get a simple ratio, usually a decimal. And that single number tells you exactly where you sit on the spectrum of injury risk.
Let's talk about the specific numbers because there is a target zone we want to hit. The notes call it the sweet spot.
The sweet spot is a calculated ratio between 0.8 and 1.3.
0.8 to 1.3.
When your ACWR lands in the specific window, your recent acute workload is relatively balanced with your established chronic workload. You might be pushing your limits slightly to force adaptation, say running 10 or 20% more miles than your 4-week average, but you are applying that stress within a safe, highly adaptable biological window.
So you're growing, but not breaking.
This 0.8 to 1.3 zone is where fitness builds efficiently, the repeated bout effect is triggered safely, and the statistical risk of injury is at its absolute lowest.
But let's go back to our hypothetical enthusiastic runner. It's Saturday morning, the weather is crisp, they feel amazing, and they decide to just go for it and run 35 miles this week. Even though their chronic average is only 20 miles, what happens to the math?
The math pushes them aggressively into the danger zone.
The danger zone.
A ratio of greater than 1.5 is considered a massive flashing red flag by sports scientists. If your chronic average is 20 and you suddenly run 35, your ratio spikes to 1.75.
Way over the 1.5 limit.
The empirical research, particularly extensive studies conducted on ultramarathon runners and professional field athletes, shows a direct, undeniable, exponential link between ACWR spikes above 1.5 and a significantly increased likelihood of soft tissue injury.
Because the tissue isn't prepared.
Your cellular matrix simply hasn't built the chronic architectural tolerance to handle that sheer volume of acute stress. The Achilles tendon is violently shoved into the reactive phase, and if you attempt to run again a few days later, you will rapidly slide into disrepair.
So doing too much too soon breaks the machine. We all intuitively know that. But there is a flip side to this ratio that I found genuinely surprising in the research. The danger isn't solely in overtraining. There is a massive, often ignored risk in undertraining.
Yes, the undertraining risk.
Yeah.
This occurs when your ACWR drops significantly below 0.8.
Give me an example of how that happens.
Let's say you are training for a half marathon and you decide to taper way too aggressively, essentially resting for 2 full weeks before the race. Or maybe you get busy with work, take 3 weeks completely off from running, and then try to jump straight into a hard local 10K race.
Oh, I've seen that happen so many times.
A comprehensive study analyzing competitive runners found that maintaining a ratio that is too low, specifically between 0.10 and 0.78, actually resulted in much higher injury incidence rates during actual competition.
Why would that happen? If I took 3 weeks off, my legs should feel incredibly fresh and rested. Why would I get injured?
Your muscles might feel rested, but your connective tissues are rapidly deconditioning. Remember the stress shielding concept we discussed earlier?
Right, the walking boot effect.
Because you haven't maintained a sufficient, consistent chronic load, your body loses that protective vaccine effect. The tenocytes stop prioritizing collagen synthesis. Your tendons literally lose their mechanical stiffness and their tolerance for absorbing high loads.
They get floppy.
So when the starting gun goes off and you adrenaline sprint the first mile of that 10K, the physical tissues simply aren't prepared for the sudden, violent plyometric demands of competition pace, and the structural fibers fail.
It's the weekend warrior syndrome, mathematically proven. You can't sit at a desk all month and then play intense pickup basketball on Saturday without risking a rupture.
Exactly.
Okay, so the concept is clear. But to calculate this, do I just take a basic, simple average of the last 4 weeks? Our sources mention that elite sports teams use a much more complex math model for this ratio.
You can use a simple rolling average where every single week in the last month is weighted equally. But biomechanists and elite physical therapists strongly advocate for a more advanced calculation called the exponentially weighted moving average, or the EWMA.
The exponentially weighted moving average. That sounds like a financial algorithm used by hedge funds to track stock market volatility. Why do runners need to use EWMA?
Because a simple average doesn't reflect how human biology actually works. The EWMA algorithm assigns significantly more mathematical weight to your most recent training sessions.
The recent stuff matters more.
Think about it like human memory. You probably remember exactly what you ate for breakfast yesterday. That memory carries a high weight in your brain. But you probably have no idea what you ate for breakfast 25 days ago. That memory carries a very low weight.
Yeah, no clue.
Your body's physical tissue fatigue operates the exact same way. The 15-mile run you did just 5 days ago has a massively profound impact on your current state of cellular fatigue and tendon vulnerability.
Well, the run from 3 weeks ago is basically forgotten.
Right. The 15-mile run you did 25 days ago has almost no bearing on how tired you feel today. By weighting the most recent training days heavily, the EWMA is exquisitely sensitive to dangerous, sudden spikes in load. It acts as a much more accurate, real-time early warning system that your biological capacity is approaching the danger zone.
That makes perfect sense. It prioritizes the fatigue you are actively carrying right now. So let's take this elegant mathematical concept and apply it to the absolute extreme, muddy reality of endurance sports.
Let's do it.
Our source stack includes insights from Sunrise Running Company, a coaching group dedicated specifically to ultramarathoners. When you are training to run 50 miles or 100 miles through the mountains, a foundational cornerstone of the training plan is the infamous back-to-back long run.
The dreaded back-to-back.
Yes. This means a runner might go out and grind through 20 miles on a Saturday, wake up on Sunday morning with legs that feel like absolute lead, and force themselves to go run another 15 miles.
It's brutal.
Purely from a biomechanical and mathematical standpoint, how does the body not just snap in half? How does the ACWR framework apply to surviving a back-to-back weekend without permanently destroying your Achilles? Let's be honest, stepping out the door for 15 miles on a Sunday when you just ran 20 on Saturday requires a specific type of temporary insanity.
It does require immense mental fortitude, but if we connect this to the broader strategy of load management, it is actually a highly calculated maneuver.
Calculated.
The back-to-back long run is essentially a strategic biological hack designed to build a massive chronic load, a massive bank account balance, without crossing that dangerous 1.5 ACWR spike in a single day.
Ooh, because they split it.
Yes. If you told an athlete to run 35 miles all at once on a Saturday, the acute instantaneous mechanical stress might be enough to overwhelm the tendon and cause a rupture. But by strategically splitting that exact same volume into 20 miles on Saturday and 15 miles on Sunday, you distribute the mechanical stress over a longer time frame.
You stay just under the limit.
You keep the acute load of each individual session just manageable enough to avoid catastrophic failure, while still forcing the cardiovascular and muscular systems to adapt to the profound compounding fatigue of ultra-endurance.
It's about mental conditioning as much as physical load, right?
Yeah.
You're literally teaching your brain how to override the central governor and keep firing the muscles when your legs are completely drained of glycogen.
Absolutely.
But Sunrise Running doesn't just say, quote unquote, go suffer. They outline very specific, actionable survival tactics for navigating the 24 hours between these back-to-back efforts.
They do. The margin for error between Saturday's run and Sunday's run is virtually zero. The first non-negotiable rule is hyper-focused nutritional fueling.
Like eating immediately.
Yes. If you finish your brutal 20-miler on Saturday, take a hot shower, and just collapse on the couch for the rest of the day, you are setting yourself up for an abysmal failure on Sunday.
So what should you do?
The guidelines emphasize consuming a high-quality protein source within 30 minutes of finishing the first run to immediately halt muscle breakdown and kickstart recovery. This must be paired with complex, whole-grain carbohydrates to begin aggressively replenishing the deeply depleted glycogen stores in the muscles. You must treat the time between the runs not as rest, but as a dedicated, active recovery period.
Active recovery. So laying on the couch binging television is detrimental.
Highly detrimental. Sitting stagnant for hours allows metabolic waste products like lactate to pool heavily in the lower extremities, and it allows normal post-exercise inflammation to settle and stiffen the joints.
Making you stiff for the next day.
Sunrise advocates for light, non-impact walking, gentle dynamic stretching, and targeted foam rolling on Saturday afternoon to promote blood flow and actively clear that metabolic waste.
Okay, so you fuel, you roll, you walk a bit.
And crucially, when you wake up on Sunday morning and take those first agonizing steps out the door, you must possess a profound level of bodily awareness. You must respect your limits.
What does respecting your limits actually mean in the context of an ultra runner? These are people who literally train themselves to embrace suffering. How do they know when to stop?
It requires an honest, objective differentiation between systemic fatigue and localized damage.
Fatigue versus damage.
Exactly. Discomfort, whole body fatigue, and feeling like you have heavy wooden legs are expected. You are supposed to feel terrible on day 2. That is the entire point of the exercise. But sharp, localized pain is completely unacceptable.
That's the differentiator.
If your Achilles tendon feels generally stiff and achy for the first mile, but then slowly loosens up as blood flow flow increases, that is normal fluid buildup. However, if that Achilles feels like someone is jabbing a hot knife into your heel with every single footfall and it does not improve,
That are bad.
that is your body telling you that the tendon has crossed from safe reactive adaptation directly into structural disrepair. You must know the difference, drop your ego, and be willing to walk back to the car if it's the latter.
Okay, so let's walk through the dark timeline. Let's say the worst happens. You miscalculate your ACW or math. You get stubborn and ignore the sharp pain on day 2 of a back-to-back weekend.
It happens all the time.
You wake up on Monday morning, lower your feet to the floor, and your heel feels like it is locked in an excruciating burning vice. You have officially developed a severe Achilles injury. What is the actual path forward? Because as we established earlier, the old medical advice of complete rest and icing the tendon causes stress shielding and literally makes the tissue weaker. You can't run, but you can't just rest.
Right.
This brings us to the most critical phase of our deep dive, the golden rules of rehab loading and the insertional exception. We are pulling directly from the clinical consensus guidelines published by ChiRUP, which aggregated years of the top peer-reviewed research from the British Journal of Sports Medicine.
This is the gold standard.
The core premise of modern rehab is simple to say, but hard to execute. If you get an Achilles injury, just doing a few bodyweight heel raises on the bottom stair of your house is absolutely not going to fix it.
Okay.
Why is bodyweight insufficient for rehab?
Because the biological process of tendon remodeling is entirely 100% strain dependent. We talked about how the injured tendon is a frayed rope filled with disorganized, kinked collagen.
Frayed spaghetti.
Yes. To force that damaged tendon to break down the bad tissue and synthesize fresh, healthy, perfectly parallel collagen fibers, you have to subject the tenocytes to a very specific, immense amount of mechanical tension.
How much tension?
The expert clinical consensus is that this physical remodeling process requires an exercise intensity of 70 to 90% of your 1 repetition maximum.
70 to 90% of your 1 rep max. That is incredibly heavy. I think most people associate physical therapy with light, colorful resistance bands and 1-pound dumbbells. 70 to 90% is essentially heavy powerlifting territory.
It is absolute strength training. The physiological goal is to create a 4.5 to 6.5% mechanical strain window on the tendon itself.
4.5 to 6.5%.
That specific amount of physical stretching under extreme load is the necessary biological trigger that flips the switch for new collagen synthesis. For almost any healthy adult, simply standing on one leg and pushing your own body weight up into a calf raise does not even come close to generating that much shear force.
Not nearly enough strain.
Body weight is a warm-up. To heal the tendon, you need a heavy-weighted backpack, you need to use a Smith machine, or you need to load up a seated leg press machine. You must load heavy to heal.
Okay, so if the goal is to load it as heavy as possible, my instinct in the gym is just to load up a calf raise machine and rep it out as fast as I can until my calves burn.
Yeah.
Does the speed of the movement matter, or is it just about moving the heavy weight?
The speed is paramount. You cannot bounce the weight. Rapid, ballistic, bouncy movements completely fail to trigger the remodeling stimulus.
Why does bounding fail?
The Achilles tendon is essentially a massive rigid spring. If you move fast, the tendon acts like a rubber band, utilizing stored elastic energy to bounce you back up without actually forcing the cellular matrix to do any structural work.
So you're cheating the system.
To force the tissue to adapt, you have to eliminate that bounce using a strict protocol known as heavy slow resistance.
Walk me through a single rep. Paint a picture of what a proper heavy slow resistance repetition looks and feels like.
It requires immense focus. Every single repetition should take approximately 6 full seconds to complete.
6 seconds per rep.
You start at the bottom. You spend 3 agonizingly slow, controlled seconds for the concentric phase, pushing the heavy weight smoothly up until you are fully extended on your toes. Then, without resting at the top, you spend another 3 full seconds for the eccentric phase, slowly, fighting the massive resistance, lowering your heel back down to the starting position.
3 up, 3 down.
It is a slow, shaking, intense burn that removes all momentum from the equation.
And how many of these 6-second reps are we supposed to do in a session?
The clinical protocol dictates starting with 3 to 4 sets of 15 reps at a moderate load, just to get the tissue accustomed to the slow movement pattern.
Okay.
But as the tendon begins to heal and you aggressively increase the weight to reach that critical 70-90% maximum threshold, you must drop the volume. You progress to doing 3 to 4 sets of only 6 to 8 reps
Because it's too heavy to do more.
because the weight should be so heavy that you physically cannot do a 9th rep. And crucially, you don't just use one type of movement from day one. The research supports a highly systematic progression of muscle contraction types as you heal.
What does that progression look like?
You start the rehab process with isometric contractions. This means pushing against a completely immovable object or holding a heavy weight in a static position without actually moving your ankle joint.
So no up and down at first.
Isometrics are phenomenal for the early stages of rehab when the tendon is still highly irritable and reactive because it heavily loads the tissue and reduces pain without actively stretching or shearing it.
Okay, and then what?
Once your pain levels drop and isometrics are easily tolerated, you graduate to slow isotonic movements, which is the heavy 6-second up and down reps we just detailed.
And then the final stage.
And finally, only in the very late stages of rehab, when the tendon is structurally sound again, do you reintroduce plyometrics, rapid jumping, bounding, and explosive movements to prepare the tendon for the fast, elastic demands of actual running.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Everything we just spent the last 10 minutes discussing, the heavy, slow resistance, the stretching under load, applies perfectly to mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy.
Correct.
That is when the pain is located right in the middle of the tendon, an inch or two above the heel bone. But our sources highlight a massive crucial exception to these rules. If your pain is located at the very, very bottom of the tendon, right at the exact point where it attaches to the back of the heel bone, you have what is clinically called insertional Achilles tendonitis.
Insertion.
And if you try to treat an insertional injury with the standard rehab protocol, you might actually make it significantly worse. Why is the location of the pain so important?
It all comes down to the unforgiving biomechanics of where that tendon physically anchors to the calcaneus, which is the heel bone. If you have an insertional injury right at the attachment point, the absolute worst thing you can do early in the rehab process is stretch the tendon.
But that goes against every instinct a runner has. If my calf and my heel feel incredibly tight and painful, my immediate instinct is to stand on the edge of a stair, drop my heel down toward the floor, and stretch it out to get relief.
And that is exactly the trap that keeps people injured for months. We have to go back to what we discussed in the reactive phase. That stiff, tight feeling isn't because the tissue has physically shrunk and become too short. It is a buildup of fluid pressure inside the injured tendon.
Swelling.
When you attempt to stretch your calf by dropping your heel off the edge of a step, you are putting your foot into a mechanical position called dorsiflexion.
Dorsiflexion.
In deep dorsiflexion, your toes move significantly closer to your shin. When this angle occurs, the Achilles tendon is pulled incredibly taut, and it is physically, forcefully compressed directly against the hard, bony surface of the heel bone.
So you are taking a swollen, angry, disorganized, fluid-filled tendon, and you are pulling it tight and grinding it directly against a rock.
Exactly. The Treat My Achilles clinical article uses a brilliant, relatable analogy. They say compressing an insertional injury is exactly like repeatedly prodding a deep, dark bruise with your thumb.
Ouch.
Poking the bruise won't necessarily tear the skin or break the bone, but it will severely irritate the damaged tissue and absolutely prevent the localized pain and inflammation from calming down. With an insertional injury, physical compression against the bone is the ultimate enemy.
The sources cite a fascinating clinical trial from Belgium that proved this no stretching theory conclusively. Tell us the details of the Belgian study, because this is wild.
The researchers in Belgium took 42 athletes, all suffering from chronic insertional Achilles tendinopathy, and split them into 2 distinct groups. Group 1 was assigned the standard traditional rehab protocol.
With the stretching.
They were instructed to do stretching, and they did their heavy heel raises by dropping their heels off a step into deep dorsiflexion.
In Group 2.
Group 2, however, was put on a strict, limited dorsiflexion program. They were explicitly banned from stretching the tendon at all. When they performed their heavy heel raises, they did them flat on the floor, ensuring their heel never dropped below the level of their toes.
So no stairs.
Instead of stretching for temporary relief, they were instructed to use deep calf massage. Furthermore, they were given physical heel lifting inserts to wear inside their everyday shoes, which kept the foot slightly pointed down, permanently keeping the tendon away from the bone during daily walking.
And what were the results? Did banning stretching actually work better?
The results were definitive. At both the 12-week and the 24-week clinical check-ins, the group that limited their dorsiflexion, avoided the stairs, and completely banned stretching fared significantly better.
Wow.
They reported vastly superior pain reduction and a much faster return to functional athletic movement than the group doing the standard stretching protocol.
That is incredibly actionable advice for you, the listener. If the pain is at the base of your heel, do not stretch it. Do not drop your heel off a curb. Do your heavy, straight leg heel raises flat on the floor.
And the guidelines also mention doing seated bent knee raises to target the lower muscles, right?
Yes, the calf is actually made of two muscles. The gastrocnemius is the big visible muscle up top, which you target with straight legs. The soleus is the deeper lower calf muscle, and it is best targeted when the knee is bent at a 90-degree angle.
But again, no deep stretching.
But again, you have to remember the insertional rule.
Yep.
You cannot do bent knee stretches while standing because bending the knee while standing naturally forces the ankle into deep dorsiflexion, compressing the tendon.
You'll sit down. So you must do your bent knee heel raises while seated in a chair, placing heavy weights over your knees to keep the ankle in a safe, neutral position. And for everyday life, switch to shoes with a high heel-to-toe drop, like traditional running shoes or even slight heels, to constantly take the tension off that sensitive insertion point while you walk around the office.
Okay, so let's fast forward a few months. You have been patient. You've done the heavy, slow resistance on the Smith machine. You've managed the load math. You've respected the insertional pivot and avoided the stairs. Your tendon is finally starting to feel dense and strong again. Don't have pain walking down the hallway.
That's the goal.
Naturally, you are absolutely itching to get back out on the road and run, but you can't just lace up your shoes and go hammer out a 10K on your first day back. That's a recipe for immediate re-injury. We need a plan.
A very strict plan.
We are looking closely at the strict Return to Run guidelines published by physical therapist Nathan Carlson, as well as the incredibly detailed phased protocol from the University of Colorado Sports Medicine Department. Carlson lays out what he calls a very specific hierarchy of progression for returning to the sport. It's a ladder you have to climb. What is the exact order of operations?
It is a rigid 5-step hierarchy, and the golden rule is that you must absolutely master one step before you are allowed to even attempt the next.
Okay, step one.
The order is frequency, then duration, then consecutive days, then intensity, and finally, racing.
So frequency is step one, how often you are actually going out for a run.
Yes. In the beginning, the only goal is to establish that your body can handle the sheer frequency of the impact. You want to prove you can run multiple days a week for very, very short periods, maybe just a few minutes, without triggering a reactive flare-up.
Just getting out there.
Once your tendon proves it can handle the frequency of going out 3 times a week, you lock that in and move to step 2, increasing duration. You slowly start increasing how long those individual 3 runs are.
You can go longer.
Only when you can run for a moderate, sustained duration, say 30 continuous minutes, do you attempt step 3 running on consecutive days. Going back to back without a 48-hour rest is a massive jump in load.
Like sunrise running talked about.
Exactly. Once your tendon can handle back-to-back days, you finally, cautiously introduce step 4 intensity. This means adding speed intervals, track workouts, or hill repeats.
The fast stuff.
And racing, where adrenaline pushes you past your perceived limits, is the absolute final, ultimate step. The overriding rule for this entire hierarchy is that you only change one of these variables every 1 to 2 weeks. You never increase duration and intensity in the same week.
And how do you actually know if you are ready to move to the next step? It all comes down to pain monitoring. But I love that Carlson points out a reality that most doctors avoid. Expecting zero pain during an Achilles rehab is totally unrealistic. You are remodeling tissue, it's going to be cranky. You have to learn to differentiate between acceptable discomfort and unacceptable dangerous pain. According to the CU Sports Med guidelines, what is considered acceptable?
Acceptable discomfort is generally classified as diffuse muscle soreness. It is a slight, dull joint discomfort that peaks but is completely gone within 24 hours of the run.
Gone within a day.
Most commonly with Achilles rehab, acceptable discomfort is a slight, annoying stiffness at the very beginning of a run or a walk that completely dissipates after the first 10 minutes as the tissue warms up, the blood flows, and the fluid moves out of the joint. If you experience these mild symptoms and they follow that predictable pattern, you are safe to continue progressing up the hierarchy.
And what is unacceptable? What are the screaming red flags that mean you miscalculated, you moved up the ladder too fast, and you need to back off immediately?
Unacceptable pain is anything that lingers for 2 to 3 days after a workout. It is pain that starts mild when you begin running, but instead of warming up, it becomes progressively sharper and worse as the run continues.
That sounds bad.
It is a deep, throbbing pain that aches while you are sitting on the couch, or worse, keeps you awake at night. And Carlson stresses one ultimate, non-negotiable rule above all others: no limping.
No limping. That seems obvious, but runners are stubborn.
They are very stubborn. But if the pain level forces you to alter your natural running mechanics, or if it causes you to favor the other leg during your daily walking stride around the grocery store, you are failing the load test.
Because you're hurting other things.
Limping means you are actively introducing brand new, dangerous biomechanical dysfunctions to your hips and knees just to compensate for the weak tendon. If you are limping, you must stop running immediately. Furthermore, you should never proceed if you have a visible inflammatory response, meaning visible redness, heat, or obvious swelling localized around the tendon.
To help athletes monitor this objectively, Carlson recommends performing a daily load test. What does that entail?
It is a simple daily diagnostic physical test you perform every single morning to gauge your tissue's readiness. You can either do single leg heel raises on the injured leg until absolute failure, counting the reps, or you perform aggressive single leg hopping in place. You use this test to establish your baseline capacity.
Give me an example.
If you can normally do 25 single leg hops on Monday, but suddenly you wake up on Tuesday morning and you can only do 5 hops because of a sharp spike in pain, it is a clear, objective indicator that your running progression is moving too quickly. The tissue is fatigued, and you need to scale back the load that day, regardless of what your training plan says.
And when you were doing those tentative early runs back, the environment you choose to run matters just as much as the distance. I think a lot of runners naturally assume, hey, I'm coming back from a serious injury, so I shouldn't run on the hard concrete. I'll just run on the treadmill at the gym because the deck is bouncy, it's softer, and it's safer.
That's a huge mistake.
Yeah, the research emphatically calls this the treadmill trap. Why are treadmills secretly terrible for an Achilles rehab?
It comes down to the underlying physics and mechanics of the moving belt. A highly detailed biomechanical study by Willie et al. Compared the kinetic forces of overground running to treadmill running. They found that running on a treadmill actually resulted in a 12.5% greater peak Achilles tendon force compared to running on solid ground at the exact same speed.
12.5% greater force.
It also caused a 15.6% greater loading rate, meaning the force impacts a tendon much faster and more violently, and a 14.2% greater estimated cumulative force over the duration of the run.
Why does a soft, bouncy treadmill belt cause more violent force on the Achilles than a concrete sidewalk?
Because the ground isn't stationary. On a treadmill, the motorized belt is actively pulling your foot backward while you are simultaneously trying to push your body mass forward. This completely alters your natural push-off mechanics.
Oh, that makes sense.
It places a significantly higher unnatural demand on the calf muscles and the Achilles to stabilize the ankle joint and propel the body against the mechanical assistance of the belt. So, when returning from injury, you must avoid the treadmill trap. Keep your runs outside on solid, predictable ground. Keep the routes completely flat because, as we learned from the trail runners, hills force deep dorsiflexion and compress the tendon, and above all, run slowly.
The CU Sports Medicine Department actually provides a highly granular phased protocol for this exact return process.
Yeah.
Let's walk the listener through a day in the life of this progression, because phase 1 doesn't even involve running a single step.
Correct. Phase 1 is strictly a walking program. Before you even entertain the idea of jogging, you must prove that your tendon can handle basic walking mechanics. You must be able to walk for 30 uninterrupted minutes, completely pain-free, at a fairly aggressive, brisk pace, approximately 3.5 miles per hour. If your tendon flares up after 20 minutes of brisk walking, you have absolutely no business subjecting it to the violent plyometric impact forces of running.
Okay, assuming you pass phase 1 and can power walk without pain, phase 2 introduces a dynamic warm-up and plyometrics. And the warm-up is mandatory before every single session. It's not the old school sit on the ground and touch your toes static stretching. It's active movement. Things like soldier walks, where you kick a perfectly straight leg up to your outstretched hand. Glute kicks, in and out heel taps, deep lunge twists. You are actively lubricating the joints, raising the core temperature, and firing up the neurological connections in the kinetic chain.
It's all about preparation.
But then you move to the plyometrics. Paint an audio picture of these drills because they sound intense.
This phase is entirely about preparing the tendon to act like an explosive spring again. The protocol requires the athlete to accumulate 500 to 600 specific foot contacts per session.
600.
You start with agility ladders, laying a rope ladder on the turf and spending 40 feet moving forward laterally and zigzagging in and out of the boxes with rapid footwork. Then you progress to 2-foot line jumps, hopping rapidly front to back and side to side over a line taped on the floor.
Okay, getting harder.
Then dot hops, following a numbered pattern on the floor like a fast-paced game of hopscotch. Then skater hops, bounding aggressively laterally from one leg to the other, pausing to hold the landing for a second to prove your ankle has the stability to absorb the lateral force. And finally, box hoppers, jumping with both feet up onto a low plyometric box.
Honestly, it sounds like an NFL combine warm-up for wide receivers.
It is essentially identical. It is all about rebuilding rapid neurological response times and restoring the mechanical tissue stiffness that was lost during the injury. If you can complete all 600 of those hops, bounds, and jumps without experiencing pain and without waking up with a swollen ankle the next day, you have definitively proven that the Achilles matrix can handle violent impact. Only then do you graduate to phase 3.
Phase 3, the walk-jog progression. This is the moment of truth where you finally get to run. But again, you don't just go run 3 miles around the neighborhood. It is highly regimented and structured.
It is strictly interval-based. You start by running at a very easy pace for exactly 1 minute, followed immediately by walking for 1 minute to let the tendon recover.
Yeah.
You repeat that cycle 7 times. That is a total of only 7 minutes of running.
7 minutes.
If that session goes well and you pass your single leg hop test the next morning, you take a full rest day. Then you might progress to running 2 to 3 minutes, walking 1 minute, repeated 5 times. You slowly, painstakingly build this interval structure over weeks until you can finally run for 20 minutes continuously.
It's a slow burn.
The progression guidelines at this phase are ironclad. You always, without exception, separate your run days with a full 24-hour rest day, and once you establish a baseline running distance, you never increase your weekly volume by more than 10%.
It requires an immense, almost frustrating amount of patience and ego checking. But the alternative is rushing it, sliding right back into the disrepair phase and having to start from zero all over again 6 months later.
That's the reality.
Okay, we have covered an incredible amount of ground. We've dissected the biomechanics of the ankle, the complex math of load management, the heavy lifting of physical rehab, and the rigid discipline of the return to run. But what if there was a way to give your body an unfair biochemical advantage?
Now we're talking about nutrition.
What if you could swallow something that literally fundamentally changed the internal mechanical properties of your connective tissues? All right. This brings us to our final and perhaps most futuristic topic, the nutritional edge collagen peptides. We have a brand new, highly specific study from PubMed published in December 2025. Tell us about the setup of this randomized controlled trial, because the methodology is fascinating.
This is a truly groundbreaking nutritional intervention. The researchers recruited 50 healthy, young, sedentary males for the trial.
Sedentary.
That sedentary distinction is actually very important. They specifically chose non-athletes, so their baseline tendon tissues hadn't already been maximized and stiffened by years of heavy training. They wanted a blank slate. They split these 50 men into 2 groups in a rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled setup. The intervention group was instructed to consume a beverage containing exactly 10 grams of highly bioavailable collagen peptides every single day for 16 solid weeks. The placebo group drank a beverage that looked, smelled, and tasted identical, but contained absolutely no active ingredients.
10 grams of collagen peptides a day for 4 months. And to be clear, a peptide is just a broken down protein that is easier for the body to absorb, right?
Ooh, exactly.
So before and after the 16-week intervention, they subjected these 50 guys to an intense battery of clinical tests. They used an MRI machine to measure the exact cross-sectional area and physical size of their calf muscles and Achilles tendons. They used advanced ultrasound shear wave elastography to measure the actual mechanical stiffness of the internal tissues.
Very high-tech measurements.
And they strapped them into dynamometer machines to precisely measure their maximal isometric contraction torque, meaning their pure absolute peak strength, as well as their rate of torque development. What did swallowing 10 grams of collagen every day for 16 weeks actually do to the human body?
The findings were remarkable and highly specific. In the group taking the collagen peptides, the shear wave elastography revealed a statistically significant increase in the shear mechanical stiffness of both the medial gastrocnemius, the main calf muscle, and the actual Achilles tendon itself.
And the placebo group.
The placebo group, on the other hand, saw 0 significant changes in tissue stiffness.
Now, wait a minute. We need to clarify this because we spent the first half of this deep dive talking about how Runners constantly complain about their Achilles feeling stiff in the morning and how we want to avoid the brittle, dry stiffness that comes with old age and type 3 collagen. Why is this study highlighting increased stiffness as a massive positive result? Is stiffness good or bad?
It is vital to separate the clinical symptom of stiffness, which is the painful fluid pressure and swelling we discussed in the reactive phase, from the actual biomechanical property of stiffness.
They are different things.
Very different. In tendon mechanics and elite sports performance, structural mechanical stiffness is highly, highly desirable. The best way to understand this is to think of your Achilles tendon as a giant coil spring.
Okay, a spring.
If you have a loose, floppy, highly compliant spring like a cheap slinky, when you push against it, it just squishes down. It absorbs a massive amount of energy, but it doesn't push back very hard. It's inefficient.
Right.
But if you have a stiff, tightly wound, heavy-duty suspension spring, when you apply force to it, it barely compresses and it immediately snaps back with massive elastic return.
So a mechanically stiffer tendon is a much more efficient, explosive spring. It returns free energy to the runner with every step.
Exactly. And that mechanical reality is perfectly reflected in the study's second major finding. Because the daily collagen supplementation fundamentally increased the mechanical stiffness of the muscle and the tendon, it led directly to a significant increase in the subject's rate of torque development, or RTD.
Rate of torque development. Break that concept down for me.
RTD is the ultimate measure of explosive muscle strength. It isn't a measurement of how much absolute total weight you can lift in a slow squat. It is a measurement of how incredibly fast you can summon and apply that force.
Like explosiveness.
Think of a sprinter pushing off the starting blocks. The one who can deliver the most force into the blocks in the first hundredth of a second wins. That is RTD.
Wow.
By making the Achilles tendon a stiffer, tighter spring, the collagen supplementation allowed the subjects to transmit the raw force generated by their calf muscles directly to their skeletal structure much faster, with zero wasted energy absorbing into a floppy tendon.
That is incredible. But did the collagen actually make the muscle or the tendon visibly bigger? Did it cause hypertrophy like the uphill mountain trail running did? If I take collagen, am I going to get massive calves?
This is where the biology gets really nuanced and fascinating. No. The pre- and post-MRI scans showed absolutely zero changes in the cross-sectional area, meaning the physical, visible size of the calf muscle or the Achilles tendon in either group.
So it didn't grow.
Furthermore, there was no change in their maximal isometric contraction torque, meaning their absolute peak strength, the maximum amount of weight they could push, didn't change at all.
So the engine didn't get bigger and the toe cable didn't get any thicker.
Correct. The collagen fundamentally changed the internal microscopic architecture of the tissue, not its visual size. It provided the exact amino acid building blocks, specifically glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, that the tenocytes needed to increase the molecular cross-linking density of the existing matrix.
It just upgraded the material.
It resulted in a stiffer, vastly more explosive transmission system without adding a single ounce of mass.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what does this ultimately mean for you, the listener, whether you are a runner, a tennis player, or just someone who wants to stay active and healthy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves definitively that targeted nutritional interventions can literally modify your inherent human mechanical properties. We usually think of improving our explosive performance or protecting our joints purely through external physical inputs like doing heavy squats, jumping on plyometric boxes, or running up mountains.
Right, in the gym.
But this 2025 study shows that providing the body with the specific biochemical raw materials found in collagen peptides gives your cells the precise tools they need to optimize the stiffness, efficiency, and resilience of your tendon matrix from the inside out. It is the ultimate fusion of biochemistry and biomechanics.
It is an accessible biochemical edge, a simple 10-gram daily habit that literally upgrades your body's internal hardware. We have covered an immense, incredible amount of ground today. Let's briefly recap this journey before we wrap up.
Good idea.
We started by entirely tearing down the outdated myth of tendonitis. We replaced it with the biological reality of the Cook and Purdom continuum, understanding that your tendon exists on a living spectrum from a reactive, water-filled swelling to dangerous, frayed disrepair, and ultimately to chronic degeneration.
The 3 stages.
We saw how the sheer physical act of running uphill on mountain trails can trigger the repeated bout effect, forcing the body to literally construct a fundamentally thicker, more resilient Achilles tendon to handle the extreme load.
A mountain adaptation.
We learned that to safely achieve those strength-building loads without ruining our bodies, We must respect the math of the acute to chronic workload ratio. We have to stay in that 0.8 to 1.3 sweet spot, and we have to treat any sudden load spike above 1.5 as the catastrophic danger zone it truly is.
Stay out of the danger zone.
If you do unfortunately find yourself in need of rehab, we establish the golden non-negotiable rules. You must use heavy slow resistance at 70 and 90% of your maximum capacity, utilizing agonizing 6-second reps to force the tissue to structurally remodel.
3 up, 3 down.
And crucially, we learn the insertional exception. If your pain is located right at the heel bone, you must absolutely banish deep dorsiflexion stretching from your life to avoid prodding the proverbial bruise against the calcaneus.
Those stairs.
Finally, we laid out the strict patient hierarchy of returning to the sport you love. We learned to pass the daily load tests of single leg hops. We learned why we must avoid the motorized treadmill trap. And we discovered how a simple daily dose of collagen peptides can mechanically upgrade the stiffness and explosive power of your entire lower leg. It is a massive amount of clinical science and biomechanical data, but it all points to one incredibly empowering truth. You possess the power to protect, upgrade, and rebuild your own body, provided you actually understand the biological rules it plays by.
I want to leave you with this final lingering thought as we wrap up our analysis of these sources. Your Achilles tendon is not just a static, dumb cable mindlessly connecting your calf muscle to your heel bone. It is a highly dynamic, hyper-intelligent, living ledger. It actively, constantly records every single terrain choice you make, every sudden sprint, every rest day you take, the fluoroquinolone antibiotics you might be prescribed, and as we just learned, even the specific amino acids floating in your morning coffee. If a simple calculated shift in load management and 10 grams of peptides can fundamentally alter the microscopic stiffness and explosive biomechanical power of your body's thickest tendon, what other perceived physical limits are you currently accepting as permanent that are actually just waiting for the exact right input to change?
That is a brilliant, profound question to leave off on. A massive thank you to you, our listener, for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the source material. We hope you walk away or run away pain-free with a much deeper, richer understanding of the incredible biological machine you are operating every single day. Until next time, keep learning, keep moving, and we will see you on the next deep dive. With every single step you take on a run, there is this hidden muscle deep in your calf that basically slams your Achilles tendon with up to like 6 to 8 times your body weight and force.
Yeah, it's honestly a staggering amount of pressure when you really think about the mechanics of it.
Right. I mean, think about that for a second. If you weigh, say, 150 pounds, that is over 1,000 pounds of force just ripping through a single band of tissue.
Step after step, mile after mile. The Achilles is the largest and absolutely the strongest tendon we have, which makes sense because it's essential for human locomotion.
But because of that massive workload, it's sports physiotherapy standards, return to running frameworks, and some truly fascinating ultrasound studies on marathoners and trail runners.
Really cool data in those studies, by the way.
It's wild. Our goal today is to decode exactly what happens to the Achilles under stress, why it hurts, and most importantly, lay out the science-backed roadmap to rebuild it so you can get back on your feet stronger.
But, before we talk about rebuilding, we kind of need to define the breakdown.
Right, like what is actually happening when it hurts?
Exactly. So when that 6 to 8 times body weight workload exceeds what your tendon can currently handle, you get what clinicians call Achilles tendinopathy, or AT.
Which is basically the classic too much too soon injury, right?
Hit the nail on the head. You overload the tissue and you end up with localized pain and swelling. And this usually happens in one of 2 specific spots.
The insertion point and the mid portion, yeah.
Yep. Right at the insertion point where the tendon attaches to your heel bone, or in the mid portion, which is the structural pinch point about 2 to 6 centimeters above the heel.
But I think that the way most of us visualize this injury is just, well, it's completely flawed. Mm-hmm. We tend to view our joints and tendons like simple machinery.
Like car parts.
Exactly. Like a car tire losing its tread. You run too much, the rubber wears down, it frays, and eventually you go flat.
It's a comforting analogy because it's so easy to picture in your head, but biologically, it's completely inaccurate.
Because the tendon isn't just this inert rubber band.
No, not at all. Tendons are highly reactive, living tissue. And to really prove that, we can look at this brilliant study that tracked non-elite marathon runners.
Oh, this is the one using that specialized imaging, right? The Ultrasound tissue characterization.
UTC, yeah. It's an incredible tool. So they take these runners and they scan their Achilles tendons right before they run 26.2 miles.
Okay.
And then they scan them again exactly 2 days after the race.
See, I found this part so counterintuitive at first. Because logic dictates that after thousands of impacts on hard pavement, the tendon would look, I don't know, inflamed, damaged.
Or at least super fatigued, right? But at 2 days post-marathon, the researchers found absolutely nothing.
Wait, really? Nothing at all?
Nothing. The tendon structure looked entirely unchanged on the scans, which challenges basically everything we assume about wear and tear.
That is wild. But you were saying it makes sense when you understand how the UTC imaging actually works, right?
Yeah, because a standard ultrasound just gives you a black and white shadow. But a UTC scan creates this 3D color-coded map of the actual collagen alignment inside the tendon.
Like the microscopic architecture.
Exactly. And the reason that architecture looked totally fine at day 2 is because the tendon matrix doesn't respond instantly to mechanical stress. The biological response is delayed.
Ah, okay. So the real adaptation happens later.
Right. The real magic happened at the 7-day mark.
So a full week after the race, they scan them again. And suddenly they see this significant increase in, what do they call it? Echotype 2 tissue.
Yep, echotype 2. And simultaneously, a decrease in disorganized tissue.
So how exactly do we interpret that? Like, what actually is echotype 2 tissue?
Think of echotype 2 as highly active adapting tendon bundles. They actually look wavy on the scan because they're in a state of active remodeling.
Meaning the tendon is literally rebuilding itself.
Yes, you're seeing the cellular response. Inside the tendon, you have these specialized cells called tenocytes. Think of them as microscopic construction workers.
Okay, I like that visual.
And they are highly mechanosensitive. So during the marathon, they sense all that physical pulling and stretching. And over the next week, they respond to that mechanical load.
By doing what exactly? Synthesizing new collagen.
Exactly. They actively lay down new collagen and reorganize the fibers to handle that exact type of stress better next time. The tendon is constantly reading its environment.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy, because the rubber band thing is clearly out. So if I'm understanding this right, the tendon isn't like a frayed climbing rope slowly tearing fiber by fiber.
Right.
It's more like a suspension bridge. A bridge that is actively thickening and rebuilding its own steel cables in response to the traffic driving over it.
What's fascinating here is that your suspension bridge analogy is physically measurable. The tendon's structure literally adapts to the demands you place on it.
And we see the ultimate expression of that when we look at the other study, the one comparing trail runners to road runners.
Oh, that data is just incredible.
It really is. They found that trail runners have significantly thicker, larger Achilles tendons than road runners.
Substantially beefier tendons, yes. They measured the cross-sectional area.
And it directly correlated to their weekly elevation gain. Which is crazy because you'd assume grinding up mountains would degrade the tendon, but it actually upgraded it.
And that's all because of the specific mechanical stress. Trail runners force a much greater range of motion on their ankles.
Right, because of the inclines.
Exactly. When you run up a steep hill, your ankle goes into deep dorsiflexion, meaning your toes are pulled way up toward your shin.
Which puts a huge stretch on the Achilles.
A massive stretch. And that deep stretch, combined with the explosive push-off required to climb, places an immense load on the tissue.
So those tenocytes, the construction workers, they just go into overdrive.
Yep. In response to that repetitive extreme tension, the body literally builds thicker suspension cables to handle the mountain traffic.
Okay, but this creates a massive contradiction in my mind.
How so?
Well, if the tendon is this brilliant, adaptable piece of hardware that can thicken itself on demand, why does it fail? Why are 10 to 15% runners getting injured if we're this good at adapting?
Because the tendon doesn't operate in a vacuum, it's part of a kinetic chain.
Meaning the problem isn't usually the tendon itself.
Exactly. The reason the tendon fails usually lies in the muscles attached to it. Specifically, it fails when there is a profound lack of strength in the soleus muscle.
The soleus. Okay, let's get into this because this is the hidden shock absorber, right?
Yes. The soleus is designed to be your primary biological shock absorber. If it isn't strong enough to absorb the impact of your foot striking the ground, that kinetic energy doesn't just vanish.
It travels straight up the chain.
Straight up. And the Achilles tendon is left to take the absolute brunt of the force.
And the crazy thing is, the soleus is a muscle that most people, even really seasoned athletes, completely ignore. We should probably differentiate the anatomy here.
We definitely should, because it completely dictates how you train.
Right. So when you look at someone's calf, that visible, bulky muscle at the top, the one that pops when you stand on your tiptoes, that's the gastrocnemius.
Correct. But the soleus lies deep underneath it.
Yeah.
And their biomechanics are totally different.
Because the gastrocnemius crosses both the ankle and the knee joint, right?
Exactly. Because of that, a traditional standing calf raise effectively targets the gastrocnemius. But as soon as you bend your knee,
You introduce slack.
Yep. You introduce slack into the gastrocnemius, effectively turning it off. So to isolate and strengthen the hidden shock absorber, the soleus, you absolutely must perform a seated calf raise with a bent knee.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. You walk into literally any gym and you see people doing heavy squats, heavy deadlifts.
Maybe some standing calf raises if you're lucky.
Right, but almost no one is loading up the seated calf raise machine. So you end up with these active people who have massively strong engines like powerful quads, but terrible shock absorbers.
And the clinical sources we reviewed provide very strict objective strength standards to expose exactly that weakness.
Let's run through those benchmarks because they are eye-opening.
For sure. So if you want to know if your soleus is ready to handle running forces, you test it on a seated calf machine. For the general non-running population, the baseline is lifting about 0.5 times your body weight.
Okay, half your body weight. That seems doable. But for the listener, if you are a recreational athlete running a few times a week, that number jumps up, right?
It jumps to 1.0 times your body weight.
Meaning, if I weigh 80 kilograms, I need to be able to load 80 kilograms of iron onto a seated calf machine and lift it cleanly.
Exactly. And the scale just continues upward from there. A well-trained athlete should be hitting 1.25 to 1.5 times their body weight.
Wow. What about the elites?
Elite athletes like sprinters or rugby players, they're consistently lifting 1.75 to 2.0 times their body weight seated.
That is a massive amount of weight on a bent knee. And there's a symmetry requirement too, right?
Yes, the research stresses symmetry.
Right.
Your left to right strength must be within 10% of each other.
Because if your right soleus is way weaker than your left, you're relying on the tendon to make up the difference.
Exactly, which makes you a prime candidate for Achilles tendinopathy on that weaker side.
But strength is only one side of the coin for an endurance athlete. We also need to talk about muscular endurance.
Which brings up a very humbling clinical benchmark. For general injury resilience, you should be able to perform 25 or more single leg standing calf raises with your own body weight.
Just unweighted, you and gravity.
Yep, but you have to do them slowly through a full range of motion without bending your knee or using momentum.
Doing 25 strict single leg calf raises is incredibly hard. Like if you're listening, try it in your kitchen later. It will absolutely light your calf on fire.
Oh, it's brutal.
But okay, let's say the listener is dealing with a cranky Achilles right now. Trying that kitchen test is just going to hurt. If I have a highly irritable tendon, how do I safely build this massive soleus strength without throwing gasoline on the fire?
Well, that is exactly where the specific rehabilitation protocol comes in. Based on the sports physio standards, you cannot just jump straight into heavy loading.
So what's the roadmap?
It's a very clear 3-stage rebuilding protocol. And stage 1 is isometrics. This is your medicine.
Hold on, let me push back on this a bit. If I have an acutely painful Achilles, traditional advice usually revolves around resting it, right? Or doing those eccentric heel jumps.
Boulder Alfredson protocol, yeah. Dropping your heel slowly off a stair.
Right. But you're saying we don't do that early on, but we still load it with isometrics. Why are we putting weight on a painful tendon at all?
Because complete rest actually causes the tendon matrix to degrade further. The tissue needs mechanical stimulation to heal.
But what's wrong with the heel drops off a stair?
The problem with the older Alfredson protocol is that for an acutely flared up tendon, dropping the heel forces the tissue through a massive range of motion. It's highly provocative.
So it just pisses the tendon off more.
Exactly. Isometrics solve this. An isometric hold means you load the tendon in a static position.
Like just holding a calf raise.
Yep. You push up into a mid-calf raise and you just hold it there, completely still for 45 seconds. And you repeat that 5 times.
And how exactly does holding a static position act as medicine for the pain?
It creates a phenomenon called cortical inhibition. Heavy, static isometric holds literally alter the way your nervous system processes the pain signals from the tendon.
Wait, really? It just turns down the pain?
It has an immediate localized analgesic effect. It quiets down the nervous system, decreases the irritability, and lets you load the muscle without stretching the tendon through a painful range.
That makes perfect sense. You're basically tricking the nervous system into turning down the alarm bells.
Exactly. And once that baseline pain starts to decrease, you graduate to stage 2, isotonics. Specifically, heavy slow resistance, or HSR.
Okay, heavy slow resistance. This is where the actual structural remodeling happens, right?
Yeah.
Building that suspension bridge.
Yes. To signal those tenocytes to lay down thick new collagen, the tendon requires heavy mechanical load and it requires significant time under tension.
And the prescription for this is brutally slow. We were talking 3 to 6 seconds on the way up and 3 to 6 seconds on the way down.
Super slow. And crucially, the sources emphasize doing these in the mid-range of motion.
Right, so you weren't dropping your heel way off the edge of a step.
Yeah.
You weren't pushing all the way up onto your tiptoes. Why is that mid-range restriction so important?
It comes down to the physical anatomy of your heel. The Achilles tendon physically wraps around the calcaneus, which is your heel bone.
Okay.
If you drop your heel far past parallel or push up onto the very tip of your toes, you stretch the tendon so tightly that it physically compresses against that bone.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it compressing against the bone.
Yeah, and that compressive load is incredibly irritating to a tendon that's already trying to heal. By staying in the middle of the movement, you completely avoid that bone compression.
While still getting all the cellular benefits of lifting heavy weight.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And when we're slowly progressing this way toward those benchmarks we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Starting at maybe 10 to 15% of your body weight and eventually building toward doing single leg raises with 0.4 to 0.5 times your body weight in added resistance.
Okay, so once you've built that base strength, how do you know when you're ready to move on?
You look for a very specific clinical sign: the disappearance of morning stiffness.
Because that severe stiffness when you get out of bed is a classic sign of an angry tendon, right?
It's the hallmark sign of a chemically irritated tendon. Once that stiffness is gone, you're ready for stage 3, energy storage.
Right, because tendons ultimately aren't just thick cables, they are springs. They have to absorb and release kinetic energy rapidly.
Exactly. This is where you reintroduce plyometrics. You start with gentle double leg hops in place, progress to single leg hopping, and eventually move to box jumps and bounding.
But there's a huge caveat to this entire 3-stage protocol, isn't there? The timeline.
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the success of this hinges on your pacing, and that pacing is dictated entirely by cellular biology. Tendon adaptation takes time.
Break that down for us. What happens after a heavy rehab session?
When you do a heavy, slow resistance session, you are literally breaking cellular bonds. For the first 24 to 36 hours after that workout, your tendon actually undergoes a period of net protein degradation.
Wait. So immediately following a heavy rehab session, the tendon actually gets structurally weaker before it gets stronger.
Yes. The mechanical stress signals the body to clear out old, damaged tissue, that's the degradation, before the tenocytes synthesize the new, stronger collagen.
So if I'm out there doing heavy tendon loading every single day,
You interrupt that synthesis phase. You keep the tendon trapped in a constant state of degradation and breakdown.
that is such a critical mechanism to understand. It completely reframes why rest days are mandatory, not optional.
Yeah, you absolutely must give the tissue 24 to 36 hours of recovery to allow the biological bridge building to actually occur.
Okay, so let's say you've done the work. You used isometrics to quiet the nervous system. You built up your soleus strength. You recover your spring capacity. Now comes the scariest part,
The comeback.
the comeback.
Mm-hmm.
How do you return to running without just tearing down the bridge you spent months rebuilding?
Well, returning to running requires a complete psychological shift in how you view pain. The most important rule to internalize is that you do not need to be completely 0 out of 10 pain-free to run.
See, if you're listening to this and you've been battling Achilles pain for months, hearing that you are allowed to run while it still hurts probably sounds terrifying.
Oh, I completely understand that fear.
We are so hardwired to stop at the first sign of pain, it feels like we're causing damage.
It feels incredibly counterintuitive. But the reality is that a newly remodeled tendon will often retain a low hum of sensitivity long after it is structurally sound.
So what's the acceptable threshold?
The clinical guidelines clearly state that a pain level of up to 3 out of 10 is acceptable during the activity.
3 out of 10.
Yeah.
Okay, but how do you know if you pushed it too far?
The true test of whether you exceeded the tendon's structural capacity isn't how it feels while you're running. It's the 24-hour response.
The morning after.
Precisely. If your pain spikes massively the next morning, or if that crippling morning stiffness returns, that means your mechanical load exceeded the tendon's capacity.
So to monitor this safely, the sources recommend a daily load test, right?
Yep. Every single day, do a few single leg hops or single leg heel raises. This gives you a baseline to check the mood of the tendon.
And if it tolerates the load test the same as the day before, you're generally safe to proceed. But there is one absolute non-negotiable rule when you're actually out on a run.
No limping.
No limping.
If your pain level alters your biomechanics, if you start favoring one side or changing your stride, you stop immediately.
Because limping just shifts the force absorption somewhere else.
Exactly. And very quickly, your Achilles tendinopathy creates a compensatory knee, hip, or lower back injury.
So assuming you pass the daily load test and you're keeping the pain under a 3 out of 10, how do you structure the actual running volume?
The sources lay out a strict step-by-step hierarchy for your return. You are only allowed to change one variable at a time.
And you hold that variable constant for 1 to 2 weeks before advancing?
Correct. The order of progression is vital. First, you only increase frequency, how many days a week you run. Keep the runs incredibly short, but run more frequently.
And once you tolerate that,
Then you increase duration, how long each individual run is. Next, you introduce consecutive days of running.
okay, frequency, duration, consecutive days.
Right. And only after you master back-to-back days do you introduce intensity, adding speed work or intervals. And the absolute final step is racing.
That is a very clear ladder to climb. And while you're climbing it, the research provides some major mechanical modifications to protect the tendon. First one, kept the terrain flat.
Yes. We learned from the trail runners that hills force the ankle into deep dorsiflexion, which stretches the tendon under load. Early in your comeback, avoid hills completely.
Second modification, and this one blew my mind.
Yeah.
You need to be exceptionally careful with the treadmill.
Yeah, this is a very surprising finding for a lot of runners. People naturally gravitate toward the treadmill for rehab because it feels like a softer, more controlled environment.
But the biomechanical data tells a completely different story.
It really does. Running on a treadmill actually increases peak Achilles force by 12.5% and increases the loading rate by 15.6% compared to running over ground.
Why does running on a bouncy treadmill spike the physical force on the Achilles by almost 15%? Like, what's happening mechanically?
It comes down to how your body propels itself. When you run over ground outside, you are pushing your center of mass forward over a planted foot.
Right.
But on a treadmill, you're essentially hopping in place while a motorized belt physically drags your foot backward.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Because the belt is pulling the foot behind your center of mass, your calf complex has to adopt a completely different stabilization strategy. The Achilles is forced to act as a much harsher, rapid eccentric brake to stabilize the ankle before the next step.
Whereas overground running allows for a more natural stride that distributes the force better. That is a brilliant mechanical breakdown. The last modification involves footwear, right?
Yes. Zero drop shoes, where the heel and toe are the exact same height, are incredibly popular right now.
But they put maximum stretch on the Achilles.
Exactly. If you're recovering, temporarily switching to a shoe with a higher heel drop, like an 8 to 12 millimeter offset, or simply slipping a firm heel insert into your current shoe can mechanically reduce the workload and stretch on the tendon during every step.
So what does this all mean? Let's synthesize this for the listener. If you are cleared to lace up your shoes today for your first run back, it means you are completely ditching the treadmill.
Yep. Find flat, firm ground outside.
You are perhaps wearing a shoe with a slightly higher heel drop and keeping your pace incredibly slow and controlled. You're monitoring that 3 out of 10 pain boundary, no limping, and relying on tomorrow morning's daily load test to tell you if you got it right.
That is the perfect, scientifically validated formula for a safe return.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've demystified the Achilles tendon from the microscopic cellular level of a UTC ultrasound all the way to the gym floor with heavy, slow resistance and finally back out onto the pavement.
It's quite the journey.
It is. And I hope the ultimate takeaway here is clear to everyone listening. The goal isn't just about avoiding pain. It is about actively building a biological shock absorber, capable of handling whatever trails, roads, or life events you want to tackle.
And, if we look at this entire rebuilding process objectively, it offers a really profound perspective shift.
How so?
Well, in sports and in life, we tend to view injuries as purely negative events, a breakdown, a failure of the system.
But based on everything we've unpacked about cellular biology today, is it possible that a properly rehabilitated Achilles injury could actually be a blessing in disguise?
I think the physiology strongly supports that idea. I mean, we saw in the Trail Runner study that tendons literally thicken, remodel, and adapt to the specific heavy loads we force upon them. So if an injury is the catalyst that forces you to start relying on a dysfunctional movement pattern, forces you to finally isolate and strengthen that hidden soleus muscle,
And forces you to perfectly load your Achilles through those 3 stages, then you aren't just getting back to baseline. You aren't just patching a flat tire.
Exactly. You are structurally changing the tissue at a microscopic level. An injury might not be a setback at all, but rather the exact biological mechanism that leaves you with upgraded, thicker, more resilient hardware for the rest of your life.
What an incredible way to look at it. So the next time you feel that ache, remember, your body isn't a worn-out machine waiting to break down. It's a brilliant, highly adaptable suspension bridge just waiting for you to give it the right mechanical signals to build stronger cables. Something to think about next time you hit the trail. Thanks for diving in with us today.
Wow, that was so much information about the Achilles. Well, I know that I'm probably gonna do some different stuff now. Although my doctor told me to do the isolated steps and go all the way down, I think I'll try maybe a week or two and try just not going all the way down and just holding it up and seeing if that helps my Achilles. Obviously running 0 drop might not be the best idea, but it seems to be working so far. And then changing it up with the 8mm drop is helping as well with those really demanding workouts. So we'll continue to progress and make sure that I'm doing the Achilles workout. But definitely this episode was loaded with a lot of information with your Achilles, and hopefully it can help you guys out. And always be aware that maybe you can always go see a PT therapist to help you with your Achilles, and also going to see a ankle and foot doctor can help as well. They could get x-rays and let you know if you tore your Achilles or not. But hopefully this episode was helpful, and I appreciate you guys listening to it. If you want to coach, I'm always available. You can email me at runningmileschd@gmail.com, and we can get a plan working. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks for listening.